The chamber of the Galactic Council was designed to inspire awe, and perhaps a little intimidation. A hollow sphere nearly 2 kilometers wide, its interior was lined with floating platforms where representatives of 200 species hovered in careful arrangement. Above, sunlight from Clethera Prime's twin stars filtered through translucent crystalline panels, scattering prismatic light across the assembly. The air smelled faintly metallic, the scent of sterilization systems working overtime to accommodate the diverse biologies present. At the center, on the prime dais, stood High Strategist Valor Klyth of the Vorth Dominion. Tall even for his species, with jointed limbs sheathed in dark chitin and eyes the green of molten glass, he was the embodiment of calculated authority. A tactical holomap hovered beside him, showing human space as a shrinking sphere of blue amid a sea of Dominion red. "Council members," Valor began, voice a resonant chime that carried without amplification. "The conflict between the Dominion and the human species will conclude within 7 standard hours. The models are unassailable. Force disparity, 10-1. Supply chain collapse, inevitable. Psychological breaking point, imminent." Murmurs rose from the platforms, though they carried no real surprise, only confirmation of what most already assumed. Councillor Threx of the Klesari, a thin, vaporous being whose translucent form rippled like smoke, drifted closer to the dais. "High Strategist, is there truly no scenario in which the humans survive?" Valor inclined his head. "None. Their unpredictability, often overstated, cannot overturn arithmetic." He gestured to the holomap, which displayed a simulation of the human fleet being surrounded, broken, and scattered. The projection ended with Earth itself eclipsed in the Dominion's red sigil. "Then," Threx said, "it would be prudent to invite the human commander now, to spare needless destruction." At this, the chamber's central hollow emitter pulsed, and Captain Elias Kale materialized in shimmering blue light. His Terran Navy uniform was crisp, the collar open just enough to hint at disregard for formality. His eyes moved slowly across the chamber, meeting alien gazes without deference. "Captain Kale," Threx began in the formal tone of the council, "we convene to present you with terms that will preserve what remains of your people." Elias's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Funny. I thought this was a war briefing." Valor's gaze fixed on him. "Briefing? No. This is mathematics. Your fleet will be eradicated before your next planetary rotation completes. Your forces are overextended, your supply routes severed. Even your famed tenacity cannot conjure fuel from vacuum." Elias tilted his head as though considering a chessboard no one else could see. "You've run your simulations?" "Thousands," Valor replied. "All ending the same way." "Then you'll forgive me if I decline to surrender based on your crystal ball." A low ripple of amusement, rare in this chamber, passed among a few species and used to human bluntness. Threx's vapor swirled uneasily. "Captain, defiance will not alter the outcome. Neither will begging," Elias said evenly. "But unpredictability, that's another story." Valor's mandibles flexed, a subtle sign of irritation. "Unpredictability is chaos, and chaos is weakness. Depends on whether you're the one holding the match," Elias said. The chamber cooled. Even those unfamiliar with human idioms understood the edge in his voice. Threx attempted to restore the measured tone of diplomacy. "Captain, if there is some independent strategy you intend to employ, you should know the Council cannot commit forces. Intervention in this conflict would—" "I'm not asking for help," Elias cut in. "Just clearance to act without Council interference. You can keep your neutrality. I'll keep my people." Murmurs again, this time sharper, with undercurrents of both curiosity and skepticism. Valor stepped closer to the projection, looming though light could not cast a shadow. "You will not survive the day." Elias met his gaze. "That's the fun part, isn't it?" The hollow feed flickered out, leaving the counselors exchanging uneasy looks. For all their models and historical certainties, there was something in the human's tone that did not fit into their calculations. Far from Clethera Prime, aboard the TSV Resolute, Elias stepped off the hollow platform into the ship's command deck. His XO, Commander Ranave, handed him a data pad without a word. The display showed updated enemy fleet movements, Vorth's ships advancing in tight formation toward Seoul. "They're pushing harder than expected," Rana said. "They're overconfident," Elias replied. "Let's make sure they stay that way." He moved toward the observation window. Beyond it, the hangar bay stretched wide and dim, lit only by strips along the floor. At its center, surrounded by engineers in sealed suits, stood Project Aegis. The device was underwhelming at first glance, no larger than a shuttlecraft, its matte surface broken by a single band of silver alloy. Yet the air around it seemed tense, as though space itself resisted its presence. Two junior officers stood near the viewport, speaking in low tones. "That's it. That's what's supposed to save Earth," one asked. "If the math's right," the other said, "it won't just save Earth. It'll make the Dominion wish they never learned our name." Elias joined them, his gaze fixed on the device. "It's not about the math. It's about making them believe they've already won, until they don't." The hangar doors sealed, and the engineers withdrew. The Aegis remained, silent and unassuming, yet carrying the weight of a gamble no simulation could predict. Back on Clethera Prime, Vaylor ended the session with a calculated dismissal. "Prepare the record of this meeting for distribution to all member species," he instructed his aides. "Let them see the folly of human arrogance before its final extinguishment." Yet as he turned from the dais, a thought lingered, an annoyance more than concern. For all his certainty, for all the Dominion's overwhelming power, the human captain had looked at him as if the outcome was already in doubt. Aboard the Resolute, Elias stood alone in the dim glow of the navigation console. The hollow map of Seoul space spun slowly before him. His fleet's markers were scattered, apparently retreating in disarray. To the untrained eye, it was chaos. To him, it was the first tightening coil of a snare. 7 hours, the council had said. His fingers tapped the console in a slow rhythm, each beat a minute counted down in his mind. "Let's see," he murmured to himself, "how they handle 9. The TSV Resolute's war room was a dim cavern of glowing tactical displays. Projected fleet markers floated in the air, blue for Terran, red for Dominion. The blue shapes were scattered across the map, angled away from Earth, as though fleeing in panic. To most eyes, it looked like a breakdown in command. To Elias Kale, it was the opening gambit. He stood at the center table, hands clasped behind his back. Around him, 6 fleet captains appeared in miniature holograms, each framed by the background of their own bridge. "Our job," Elias began, "is not to stop them at the border. It's to convince them we can't." He tapped the table, and red markers advanced deeper into Seoul space. "We let them in. We give them what they think they want. Every step they take brings them into the exact coordinates we need." Captain Marahan frowned in her projection. "Sir, that means leaving Earth exposed." "It means leaving it baited," Elias said. "We can't outgun them. But we can outthink them." Commander Ranave, standing beside him, added, "Your orders are to avoid decisive engagements. Strike, vanish, and keep their pursuit patterns predictable. The faster they believe we're crumbling, the better." A chorus of acknowledgments followed. One by one, the captain's images winked out, leaving only the hum of the Resolute's systems. The arrival of Envoy Rest the next cycle brought a new kind of tension. The insected alien's carapace gleamed in the bridge lights, his long fingers holding a recording device already running. "The Council has instructed me to observe your methods," Rest said, his voice a dry rustle. "For the record of history." Elias didn't look up from the tactical display. "History's always more interesting in person." Ressa's antennae twitched. "Your formations lack discipline. Your ships are scattered, firing at will. This is not war, it is disorder." "It's what they think is disorder," Elias said. "That's the point." Rest blinked slowly, his species' version of skepticism, and made a note on his device. Hours later, the fleet executed its first series of feints. In the black expanse between Mars and Jupiter, 3 Terran corvettes emerged from warp in a tight triangle. They fired precisely calibrated bursts at a Vorth supply convoy, Enough to cripple, not destroy, before vanishing into deep space. The Dominion ships gave chase, only to find themselves diverted into an asteroid field seeded with timed charges. Elias watched from the Resolute's bridge as distant explosions flared like tiny suns. The Vorth ships emerged battered but still functional, just as intended. Rana glanced at him. We could have finished them. And let Vaylor know we're still dangerous? No. Let him believe we're desperate and wasteful. The game played out across the system. Terran frigates dropped false encryption keys into Dominion channels, feeding them fabricated fleet locations. Vorth squadrons warped in expecting cornered prey, only to find empty space or decoy drones broadcasting human distress calls. Rest stood silently at the edge of the bridge, recording every maneuver. He seemed increasingly unsettled. Your crews, they laugh during combat, he said at last. They make jokes. That's how we breathe under pressure, Rana said. Why? Does it bother you? It confuses me. War should be solemn. Elias didn't look up. That's why you lose to people like us. Midshift, an incoming transmission alert pulse read across the displays. Vaylor's image materialized, looming and sharp. Captain Kale, the strategist said, your maneuvers are erratic. This will not save you. Elias leaned casually against the console. Erratic's a word for people who don't understand the pattern. There is no pattern. Good, Elias said, smiling faintly. Keep thinking that. Vaylor's eyes narrowed before the transmission cut. On the Dominion flagship, an aide whispered to him about a strange regularity in human retreat vectors, but Vaylor dismissed it. Humans, after all, were prone to flailing in their final hours. The trap shape began to emerge. Every Terran withdrawal led the Dominion closer to Earth, but not directly. Instead, the routes curved in subtle arcs, drawing the enemy into a spiraling path whose center was not Earth itself, but a specific region of space just beyond its orbit. From the Resolute's bridge, Elias and Rana reviewed the composite map. To the untrained eye, the Blue Fleet's movements looked chaotic. To them, it was a tightening spiral, closing with mathematical precision. They won't see it until it's too late, Rana said. They already can't see it, Elias replied. We've made sure of that. By the 5th hour, Dominion capital ships breached the outer defense perimeter. From Clethera Prime, the Council's live feeds showed the red markers converging. Commentators in alien markets were already wagering on the minute of Earth's final bombardment. On the Resolute, the crew moved with deliberate calm. Status reports came in clipped, efficient bursts. The Aegis device, deep in the ship's core, was powered and stable. Rest stepped up to Elias. If I understand, you are leading the enemy to Earth's doorstep. Not to the doorstep, Elias said. To the exact square of the board I want them on. And then? Elias allowed himself a small grin. Then we flip the board. The Dominion's spearhead entered low Earth orbit with practiced precision, their warships casting vast shadows across the oceans below. Civilian shelters deep beneath the planet's surface were sealed, comms to the surface cut. From his flagship, Vaylor prepared the final strike. His targeting arrays locked onto the Terran capital. Victory was, in his mind, no longer a matter of if, but of minutes. Elias stood on the Resolute's bridge, the enemy fleet arrayed before him in a deadly halo around Earth. The coordinates on his tactical display glowed green. The final alignment was complete. How long? He asked quietly. 3 minutes, Rana said. He nodded once. Hold them there. The final skirmishes were deliberate distractions. Terran ships started in close, firing short bursts before retreating, pulling the Dominion into firing formations they could not easily break. Every Dominion captain believed they were minutes from the kill. On the Council's observation platform, Vaylor's earlier confidence seemed justified. Alien dignitaries nodded to one another, already preparing the political aftermath. Back on the Resolute, Elias glanced at Res. Record this next part carefully. They'll be studying it for a long time. Res hesitated. What exactly am I about to see? Elias's eyes stayed on the enemy fleet. The moment they stopped believing their own numbers. At the 2-minute mark, the Dominion's flagship moved into optimal bombardment range. Elias gave no order to intercept. Instead, his gaze was fixed on the thin line of data scrolling down the side of his display, the live calibration feed for Project Aegis. At 1 minute, Rana's voice was steady. All ships in position. Elias exhaled slowly. Good. Let's keep it that way. The Dominion, seeing no counteroffensive, held position as planned. Every warship, every weapons array, locked and ready. Every piece of the board exactly where Elias wanted it. In the council chamber, a Klasari aide whispered to her superior. Why are they just sitting there? Her superior replied. Because they have nothing left. On the Resolute, Elias leaned forward. Almost there. Give me 3 more minutes. The alien flagship trembled under the shockwave. The distant blue curve of Earth gleamed on the view screens, serene despite the war raging above it. Inside the Galactic Council's war chamber, silence fell, not out of respect, but in disbelief. Commander Trell, supreme strategist of the Council's forces, leaned forward, claws tapping against the console. Status report. The answer came too slow for his liking. Primary fleet, destroyed. Orbital control, lost. Remaining forces, unresponsive. Trell's black eyes narrowed. Unresponsive? Or destroyed? The comm officer hesitated. Both. On the opposite side of the chamber, Captain Mason Cole stood with his hands in his pockets, looking at the scene on the massive central display. He'd been brought aboard as a prisoner of war only an hour ago. Now, his captors were watching their entire invasion collapse in real time. You're quiet, Commander, Mason said, his voice casual, almost conversational. I thought you predicted you'd have Earth in chains within, what was it? 6 hours? Trell's head snapped toward him. We accounted for every known weapon you possess. Every warship. Every defense grid. This, he jabbed a claw toward the screen, was not possible. Mason shrugged. That's because you were looking for weapons. We weren't going to fight you on your terms. On the screen, the last remaining Council battlecruiser erupted into a bloom of white plasma. Mason's expression didn't change, but inside, he felt the knot in his chest loosen. That had been the last piece. The operation was over. What did you do? Trell's voice carried the edge of something Mason had never heard from him before, fear. We ended the war, Mason said simply. The room shifted. Council staff exchanged uncertain glances, their confidence eroding. The giant central display switched to a live feed of Earth's orbit, clear, empty, and under human control. Dozens of alien ships that had once formed the invasion armada were now drifting wrecks. You don't understand, Mason said, stepping closer to the display. Your war plans assumed we'd fight to survive. That we'd focus on defense. But humans don't just survive. We adapt. We learn. And when it comes down to it, we end threats. Trell's claws dug into the console. You had no fleet capable of such destruction. Not a fleet, Mason replied. Something smaller. Smarter. Faster. It wasn't a lie, but Mason wasn't going to give him the details. Let them stew in uncertainty. Let the myth grow. The truth, that humanity had deployed a single, highly experimental orbital weapon, designed to overload enemy reactors from the inside, would stay classified. All the Council needed to know was that it worked, and it could happen again. You think this will stop us? Trell growled. We will regroup. We will return. Mason gave a faint, humorless smile. Then you'll face the same result. Only faster. The words landed heavier than any missile. The room felt colder. The Council's liaison, a tall, silver-skinned diplomat named Serac, broke the silence. Commander, further action risks annihilation of all Council fleets in the sector. I recommend withdrawal. Trell glared at him, but said nothing. Instead, he turned his gaze back to Mason. What do you want? Mason stepped forward, meeting his eyes without flinching. The war ends now. You recall every ship, every soldier, every drone from human space. You sign a treaty acknowledging Earth as independent, untouchable, and off-limits. And if we refuse? Trell asked. Mason didn't blink. Look out the window. The commander followed his gaze. Far beyond the flagship, a human vessel, the Resolute, hovered in orbit, small compared to the alien Leviathan. And yet 1 minute earlier, its counterpart had erased an entire fleet. This is extortion, Trell said. This, Mason corrected, is survival. You can call it whatever you want. But make no mistake, you won't get another chance. The council chamber buzzed with low conversation. Serac leaned toward Trell. If they can do this once, they can do it again. The balance has shifted. Finally, the commander's shoulders sagged. We will consider the terms. Don't take too long, Mason said, turning toward the exit. We're patient people. But not that patient. Back on Earth, the celebrations were subdued at first. Military command knew the public would never hear the exact details, only that the invasion was over and humanity had won. The official statement called it a decisive and irreversible victory. In the secure war room beneath the Pentagon, Mason gave his debrief. The room was filled with senior officials, but no one interrupted him. When he finished, the Secretary of Defense exhaled slowly. 1 shot, she said. 1 minute. And it's over. Mason nodded. That's all it needed to be. Can they replicate it? No. And they won't even know where to start. We made sure of that. The secretary leaned back, the tension easing from her shoulders. Then the message is clear. Humanity isn't prey. We're a predator they didn't see coming. Mason didn't smile. He wasn't in the mood for triumph. He thought of the casualties, millions dead before the weapon had fired. The war might have ended in minutes, but the scars would last generations. Still, he knew what mattered most. The council wouldn't try again. Not soon. Maybe not ever. A week later, Mason stood on the balcony of his apartment, watching the city lights stretch into the distance. The war was over, but the world felt different. The news feed on his wrist link played a recorded broadcast from a council world. They weren't calling it a surrender, they never would, but the message was clear: human space will remain sovereign and inviolable. The reporter's voice droned on, speculating about the mysterious event that had ended the war. Mason turned it off. Let them wonder. Let them tell stories about the humans who ended a war in less time than it took to prepare a meal. Somewhere out there, Trell was probably still trying to figure out how it had happened. He never would. And that was the point. Humanity had just rewritten its place in the galaxy, not as subjects, not as an underdog species, but as a force no one could underestimate again. Mason leaned against the railing, the night air cool against his skin. He thought of the future, of new alliances, new threats, and the quiet knowledge that they had a weapon no one could counter. The war had lasted weeks. The battle minutes. But the warning would echo for centuries. In the end, the Council had been right about one thing. If they came for Earth, the war would be over quickly. They just hadn't expected it to be over this quickly, and with humanity still standing. Ask ChatGPT.